Clarence House had survived scandals, whispers, and decades of royal tension, but nothing prepared Queen Camilla for the moment. Lawyers placed one document before her and changed the temperature of the room. This was not gossip, not palace noise, not another quiet family disagreement. It was a legal move from Prince William, and it struck at her claim to Clarence House. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She kept one hand near the file, as if refusing to touch it might keep the words inside contained. Across the table, a lawyer cleared his throat and read the line. William had filed to reverse her Clarence House claim, challenging her authority over the arrangement supporting her position beside Charles. Clarence House, the royal residence tied to senior family life and household power, was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol of rank, access, and whether the queen consort's place could stand beyond personal loyalty. Charles stood close enough to defend her, yet far enough to show he was struggling. The king looked at the document, then at Camilla, then back at the lawyer, and each second of silence made the blow harder. He understood why the residence mattered. It carried history, staff control, public meaning, and proof that Camilla had not merely been accepted, but settled. She had endured years of scrutiny to reach this place. Now the future king's name sat on the page like a closed door. The lawyer continued, and the room seemed to shrink around them. The filing referenced earlier household conditions tied to royal succession planning, private rules used to prepare the monarchy for its next reign. That detail changed everything. This was not William making a symbolic complaint from the shadows. This was the prince using formal force, turning family discomfort into constitutional pressure. Camilla's face tightened when she heard it. Charles lowered his eyes, because he knew his son had not chosen this path lightly. William was not in the room, but his presence filled it. The future king had moved with the calm of someone who had waited, watched, and decided that silence had become dangerous. Camilla felt the truth before anyone spoke it aloud. This filing had roots older than the morning's briefing. Something had pushed him toward this legal step long before she saw the papers, and whatever it was had reached Clarence House. But before Camilla could understand why William had moved against her claim, the palace had to face the people standing at the heart of the rupture. Every royal crisis has documents, signatures, and official language, but behind this one were four human faces. Camilla, shaken by the threat to her place; Charles, trapped between loyalty and legacy; William, carrying the burden of future rule; and Catherine, watching quietly as a private family wound became a palace emergency. Camilla had spent years believing Clarence House meant something no title alone could give her. It meant a rival. It meant acceptance. It meant the long road from public suspicion to royal recognition had finally ended behind doors she could call secure. Yet now, that certainty was being pulled apart by the one man whose future power mattered more than anyone else's approval. William did not see Clarence House as a prize to be guarded by emotion. To him, it was part of the monarchy's living structure, a place tied to access, duty, household authority, and public trust. If its control became unclear, the confusion would not stay private. It would follow the crown into the next reign. Charles felt that danger the moment he read the summary alone. He did not slam the paper down. He did not call for anyone. He simply lowered the page, slowly, as if the weight of William's decision had moved from the document into his hands. The king knew Camilla would feel this as rejection. He also knew his son would never have filed unless he believed the risk had become impossible to ignore. That was what made the silence so painful. Charles was not looking at a family complaint. He was looking at a warning from the future. William carried that burden with a calm that made it even more striking. Catherine had watched him in the hours before the filing moved forward, and she knew restraint had cost him dearly. Anger would have been easier. A sharp confrontation would have felt cleaner. But the prince chose control, and that choice revealed just how serious the matter had become. Catherine understood that he was not trying to wound Camilla for the past. He was trying to prevent the past from shaping the future in ways no one could repair. Camilla felt the wound differently. For her, the reversal did not merely question an arrangement. It questioned whether she had ever truly belonged inside the structure she thought had accepted her. The queen consort had fought for dignity, stood beside Charles through storms, and learned to survive rooms that once turned cold when she entered. Now William's legal move suggested that belonging could still be measured, limited, and challenged. The most unsettling truth was that William had gathered enough grounds to act without asking Charles first. That changed everything. This was not sudden defiance. This was preparation. And the deeper the palace looked into William's decision, the clearer it became that one hidden moment had turned discomfort into action. Long before the lawyers arrived, before Camilla's hands trembled over the file, before Charles found himself speechless beside his wife, there was a dinner inside Clarence House that no one outside the room was meant to remember. Yet that evening became the trigger. A single conversation, a single phrase, and William left knowing the matter could no longer be ignored. Camilla had not raised her voice that night. That was what made the moment more dangerous. She spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who believed the matter had already been settled. And that certainty reached William before the words were fully finished. The queen consort referred to Clarence House as my permanent royal base, then added that future access should remain under her household's discretion even after Charles' reign. To anyone else, it might have sounded like a comment about comfort and continuity. To the prince, it sounded like a line being drawn across the future. William set down his glass without force, but the silence that followed carried more weight than anger. Clarence House was not simply a residence. It was a royal household center, meaning a place where staff, private meetings, official papers, and family authority could gather around one person. That mattered because control of such a space could shape who entered, who waited outside, and who quietly influenced the crown when the monarchy changed hands. Camilla saw stability. William saw a risk that could grow stronger if no one challenged it. Charles felt the tension before anyone named it. The king shifted the conversation with practiced care, speaking of schedules, guests, and the duties waiting the next morning, but the damage had already been done. He knew his son too well. William's calm was never empty. When the future king became still, it meant he was measuring not only the sentence, but the consequences behind it. Camilla continued as if the subject had passed, yet Charles understood that something had lodged in William's mind and would not be removed by politeness. Catherine noticed it too. She watched William choose silence when a sharper man might have answered at the table. Later, away from the dinner, she asked him whether he was all right, and the prince did not offer a long explanation. He gave her only one sentence: "This cannot be left vague." Catherine understood the meaning immediately. He was not speaking about pride. He was speaking about the future, about boundaries, about the danger of private royal spaces becoming power centers if no one defined them before transition. That was the hidden beginning of the filing. Not a sudden act, not a burst of bitterness, a remembered sentence, a quiet warning. And when Camilla later heard the lawyers read William's challenge aloud, she would realize he had carried every word from that dinner into the room with him. What began as one sentence over dinner now moved toward a face-to-face clash no palisade could soften. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a door closing. William entered the room with measured calm. Camilla waited with wounded pride, and Charles stood between them like a monarch suddenly stripped of certainty. No cameras, no courtiers, no public statement, only a family forced to speak the truths it had avoided for years. William did not rush toward accusation. He understood that one careless word could turn a legal challenge into a family war, and that was exactly what he wanted to avoid. The prince had come not to humiliate Camilla, but to make clear that Clarence House could not become a private fortress around uncertainty. The crown, in plain terms, meant the institution of monarchy itself, the duties, authority, and public trust carried by the sovereign and protected by the heirs who would one day inherit it. That was why this mattered. A residence was never just a residence, when it held influence, access, and the power to shape what came next. Camilla felt the injury before William finished speaking. She pulled back her chair sharply, not in rage, but in disbelief that the future king had brought the matter to her face with such controlled force. The queen consort asked whether he truly intended to challenge her place at Clarence House, and the question carried years of struggle inside it. She had fought to be accepted. She had stood beside Charles through public storms. Now the son of the man she loved was telling her that acceptance did not mean unlimited control. Charles tried to step between them, with the instinct of a husband and the burden of a king. He spoke carefully, hoping to lower the temperature before the wound deepened, but William did not retreat. The prince reminded him that unresolved household claims do not remain harmless simply because they are personal. They become succession problems when ignored. Succession, meaning the order by which royal authority passes from one generation to the next, was the hidden pressure behind every sentence. Charles heard it and fell quiet, because he knew William was no longer speaking only as a son. Camilla's composure cracked when William mentioned the dinner. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to prove he remembered the exact moment her words changed his mind. The queen consort realized then that the filing had not been born in a lawyer's office. It had begun at a table where she had spoken of Clarence House as a permanent base and future access as something her household could still control. William had carried that sentence with him, not as gossip, but as evidence of a boundary he believed had been crossed. The folder on the table suddenly felt less like paperwork and more like judgment. Camilla saw that the lawyers were only the surface. Beneath them stood William's memory, Charles's silence, Catherine's steadying influence, and the future shape of the monarchy itself. Yet the real force behind William's move was not only his anger, it was the hidden power structure that made his filing impossible to dismiss. For years, William was treated as the patient heir, the son waiting his turn, the prince who listened more than he spoke. But the Clarence House filing revealed another truth. Behind the calm exterior was a future king already studying the machinery of monarchy, already learning where authority lived, and already prepared to use it when silence became dangerous. William had understood the burden long before anyone else saw him use it. He was not simply Charles's son, and he was not only the next figure in a family line. He was the heir, the person expected to protect the crown's future before the crown itself ever touched his head. That mattered, because royal power does not begin only on coronation day. It grows in the decisions made before the throne changes hands, in the boundaries drawn while the older reign is still breathing, and in the moments when a future sovereign decides that comfort can no longer be allowed to blur duty. Camilla's Clarence House claim became dangerous because it sat at the meeting point of home, history, and influence. A royal residence, in simple terms, is not just a private place to live. It can carry staff control, access to papers, meeting power, and public meaning. That was why the claim could not be treated like a domestic disagreement. If Camilla held too much lasting authority over Clarence House, William feared it could shape who entered the next reign, who remained close to power, and who controlled the old loyalties still moving behind palace doors. William studied the marked clause with the restraint of a man who knew every line carried a human cost. A senior lawyer slid the page across the desk, pointing to conditions from earlier household agreements that Camilla's claim had not fully satisfied. The prince did not rush. He read once, then again, because he knew the filing would wound Camilla and place Charles in a painful position. Yet hesitation carried its own danger. If he waited too long, Catherine and the next generation could inherit a royal household clouded by uncertainty, soft promises, and unfinished arguments. Charles saw the meaning with quiet devastation. William had not simply gone around him as a son. He had moved through the law as a future king, confronting ambiguity his father had allowed to remain. That truth hurt more than open rebellion. The monarch could defend Camilla's dignity, but he could not pretend that dignity erased the conditions written into the structure around her. For Charles, the filing felt like a judgment on his silence. For William, It felt like a duty he had delayed until delay became impossible. The power behind the move was colder than anger. It came from position, preparation, and the hidden rules that decide what survives when emotion fades. Once William turned private concern into formal procedure, the question could no longer be contained by family loyalty or careful words. And once that machinery began to turn, Camilla discovered that losing certainty was only the beginning. The next morning, Clarence House no longer felt like a sanctuary. Camilla walked through familiar rooms with unfamiliar caution, passing portraits, staff, and polished doors that had once seemed secure. Nothing had physically changed, yet everything had shifted. The claim she thought protected her position was now under review, and every quiet glance reminded her that the palace knew. Camilla felt the silence before anyone explained it. Staff who once moved around her with practiced ease now seemed careful with every word, as if the building itself had been warned not to breathe too loudly. The legal review had paused decisions connected to her household use of Clarence House, and that pause carried its own humiliation. A legal review, in plain terms, meant the arrangement was being examined before more authority could be granted or assumed. That mattered because every delayed approval suggested her claim was no longer trusted on instinct. It had to be checked, measured, and cleared. Camilla stopped beside a hallway table when the update reached her. Certain future decisions, she was told, now required additional clearance until William's filing was assessed. The Queen Consort rested her fingertips against the polished edge, not for drama, but because the words had taken something from beneath her. She did not collapse. She did not lash out. She absorbed the blow with the controlled expression of a woman who understood that the most painful humiliations inside royal life often arrive in careful language. Her place had not been publicly removed, but it had been privately questioned, and that was almost worse. Charles watched from across the room with a sadness he could not hide. The king knew the difference between pride and pain, and what he saw in Camilla was not simple anger. It was the shock of a woman realizing that belonging could still be conditional. He wanted to comfort her, yet comfort could not erase the machinery now moving around them. Household decisions mattered because they shaped access, influence, and who held authority when the next reign arrived. If those decisions were frozen, even briefly, everyone understood the message. William's challenge had teeth. William remained composed elsewhere, but composure did not mean peace. His aides noticed the prince delay signing a separate household note. His pen held still, as if the human cost had finally reached his hand. He knew Camilla was wounded. He knew Charles would feel betrayed. Yet he also knew that avoiding pain today could create confusion tomorrow, for Catherine, for his children, and for the monarchy he would inherit. That was the cruel balance of duty. Success for the crown could still feel like suffering inside the family. The fallout spread beyond property. Questions now surrounded ceremonial use, private access, staff authority, and post-reign arrangements. Clarence House had become a test of who controlled the future before the future officially arrived. But the crisis could not be settled by documents alone, because the deepest wound now stood between father and son. When Charles finally asked William to meet alone, the palace machinery fell away. No private secretaries, no lawyers, no carefully prepared phrases. Just a father facing the son who had challenged his wife, and a future king facing the man whose silence had allowed the question to grow dangerous. The room was quiet, but the truth was not gentle. Charles carried the pain into that meeting before a single word was spoken. He had faced public storms, family breaks, and the cruel weight of history. But this was different, because it had come from William, not from an enemy outside the gates. The king looked at his son and asked the question that had been cutting through him since the filing appeared. Was this meant to punish Camilla? It was not only a husband's fear, it was a father's fear too. He wondered whether the family had reached a point where duty could no longer hide the damage between them. William did not answer quickly. That pause mattered, because it showed the difference between anger and judgment. The prince could have defended himself with force. He could have reminded Charles of the dinner, the wording, the risk, and the warning signs everyone had tried to soften. Instead, he chose restraint again. He told his father the filing was not punishment, it was protection. The crown, meaning the living institution of monarchy and the public trust wrapped around it, could not be left vulnerable to confusion after Charles was gone. That was the fear behind every signature. Charles heard the phrase, "after Charles was gone," as more than a legal concern. He heard mortality. He heard succession. He heard the future pressing into the present without asking permission. The king felt sadness rather than fury, because William was no longer speaking like a wounded son fighting an old family battle. He was speaking as sovereign in waiting, the person preparing to inherit not only privilege, but every unresolved mistake left behind by the generation before him. That recognition hurt, because it carried truth. William finally admitted that the private dinner had changed everything. Camilla's words about Clarence House as a permanent royal base had made him understand that vague promises were no longer enough. The prince told Charles that affection could not define authority, and comfort could not become control. Clarence House had to be protected from becoming a shadow court around old loyalties. Charles lowered his gaze, because he knew love had made him delay choices that duty should have demanded earlier. The moment did not heal everything, but it changed the shape of the crisis. Charles accepted, with quiet sorrow, that protecting Camilla's dignity could not mean rewriting royal boundaries for her comfort. William accepted that his father's pain was real, even if the filing had to stand. Father and son did not leave that meeting triumphant. They left with understanding, bruised, necessary, and heavy enough to steady the palace before the storm outside began. And when the story reached the outside world, Clarence House stopped being a private address and became the symbol of a national reckoning. By sunrise, the private fracture had become public theater. London woke to a royal crisis, printed in black ink and spoken across morning broadcasts. Clarence House was no longer just a residence behind gates. It was the center of a question millions could understand instantly. Who truly controls the future when the present refuses to let go? The story broke with a force the palace had not prepared for. Newspapers did not treat William's filing as a quiet legal adjustment. They framed it as a dramatic test of his authority before kingship, a sign that the future king was no longer waiting politely for power to be handed to him. Morning broadcasters repeated the same sharp idea in different words. The prince had moved from private concern to public consequence. That mattered, because monarchy survives on controlled meaning. When control slips, even one residence can become a national symbol. Outside a Westminster newsstand, the moment became impossible to ignore. One front page read, "William moves on Clarence House," with Camilla's strained photograph printed beside the headline. People stopped, stared, and read the words twice, because the crisis felt both intimate and historic. Clarence House had always carried weight as a senior royal home, but now it represented something larger. It stood for the transfer of influence from one generation to the next, and for the painful question of whether Camilla's place could remain secure when William began defining the rules of his future reign. Near Clarence House, a small crowd gathered behind police barriers. Some people filmed in silence. Others whispered as if speaking too loudly might disturb the royal wound unfolding behind the gates. The crowd mattered because it showed how quickly a private family dispute could become public judgment. What had begun with lawyers, files, and closed-door meetings had now entered the minds of ordinary people. They were not debating only property. They were watching a monarchy decide whether love, loyalty, or succession would have the final word. Camilla saw the front page during breakfast and pushed the paper away. The queen consort had endured public judgment before, but this cut differently, because the headline turned her claim into a verdict before the palace had finished speaking. She felt exposed, not by scandal, but by symbolism. Charles saw the gesture and felt the sadness deepen. The king knew dignity was supposed to protect the monarchy, yet moments like this proved how easily dignity could be stripped away by one image, one headline, one morning broadcast. William understood the storm too. The prince knew broadcasters were not simply saying he had objected to Camilla. They were saying he had drawn a boundary around the next reign. That was why the story shook so many people. It suggested that the future was already pressing against the present, and that Clarence House had become the place where the pressure finally broke through. But beneath the headlines and public shock, the final meaning of William's filing came down to one painful truth the monarchy could no longer avoid. In the end, the Clarence House crisis was not only about rooms, gates, paperwork, or royal privilege. It was about belonging, authority, and the cost of trying to secure a place inside an institution that never fully belongs to anyone. Camilla was left shaken, Charles was left sorrowful, and William emerged with a burden no future king can avoid. Camilla understood the verdict before anyone tried to soften it. The Queen Consort had wanted Clarence House to mean permanence, not just comfort. She had wanted it to stand as proof that years of judgment, rejection, and public suspicion had finally led to something secure. Clarence House, a senior royal residence connected to status, household control, and official access, mattered because it represented more than where she lived. It showed where she stood. Yet William's filing had changed that meaning. The reversal proved that permanence could not override succession order, the royal line of inheritance that decides where authority moves when one reign gives way to the next. Camilla sat alone after the final legal briefing, holding herself with the same control that had carried her through years of pressure. But control did not hide the wound. The Queen Consort now understood that her influence had limits, drawn not by affection, but by the future structure of the monarchy. Charles saw it too. The king placed one hand on the back of a chair and did not sit, because sitting would have felt too ordinary for a moment, that had quietly taken something from both of them. He had protected Camilla for years, but he could no longer pretend protection meant allowing uncertainty to survive. William felt no triumph in what he had done. The prince had won the argument, but victory came without relief. He knew Camilla had been hurt. He knew Charles had been forced to face a truth he had delayed. Yet the future king also knew that leadership sometimes means drawing a line before confusion becomes inheritance. The crown, meaning the public institution of monarchy, and the duty attached to it, could not be handed forward with unresolved claims hidden inside its walls. Catherine stood beside William afterward, steady rather than celebratory. She understood that the decision had cost him something personal, because hurting people was never the victory he wanted. The princess did not need to speak loudly to anchor him. Her presence reminded him why the line had been drawn at all. For the next reign, for their children, and for a monarchy that could not afford private uncertainty disguised as loyalty. Clarence House became the place where William stopped waiting for the future and began defending it. Camilla left shaken, Charles left changed, and the prince stepped into a harder version of duty. The monarchy survived the shock, but it did not survive unchanged, because after this filing, everyone inside the palace understood that William's reign had already begun in spirit. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.